Can I just stick with Elon and Zuck? I think that would be. I mean, I would love to. I was so excited. Like literally, I was in Vegas when they announced that, and they were talking about doing it in the Octagon in Vegas, and all my friends were like, "We're just gonna."
They probably put a sports book up for it already. They'd betting on it. That's a good question. Who would you have picked?
Oh, definitely Zuck.
Zuck.
But have you seen the size difference though?
Yeah,
it's
size
80
difference.
pounds.
Huge. But Zuck has been trained. If Elon today, I bet Zuck. If Elon trained for a year, that'd be different.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate.
Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 5 of Drunk Real Estate. I am your host, Kyle Wilson, joined with my lovely co-hosts. First with Jay Scott. How's it going, Jay?
Everything is great. I'm excited to be here, and I actually mean that. I mean, I say that every time I'm on a podcast, but you guys are some of my favorite people.
Oh, thanks, man. We appreciate it. What are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a 2006 Zin from Napa Valley, from my favorite winery, Ridge Winery, and it's about 17 years old. So we're on the tail end of having to drink the Zin because it's not going to last much longer.
You an investor in them too, or you just like drinking their wine?
I am not. I wish I was, but yeah, drink Ridge wine, my favorite winery by far.
Next up, Mauricio. How's it going, buddy?
What's going on? I'm ready. I'm pumped.
I like your new view there. You're looking good.
I'm telling you guys before, don't get too comfortable. This is about to change. This is a makeshift. I did a live stream, my first ever live stream yesterday, and so I had this little makeshift thing, and it's going to get better and better. It's like a fine wine, Kyle. It just gets better and better.
Speaking of wine, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking a 2021 Farniente Chardonnay. I'm in a Chardonnay. I actually busted this out yesterday after my live, so I figured I'd finish it off today.
Perfect. And last but not least, we got AJ Osborne. How's it going, man?
It's going fantastic. Happy to be here with you guys.
Yeah, you got a nice energy drink with you again tonight?
Always.
Ooh,
That's right.
Red Bull.
Vitalizes the body and the mind and gives you
Don't they have different colors of that too? I see in the grocery store every once in a while. You going to switch it up on us, or just keep it the light blue?
You know, I am going to switch it up. I'm going to go crazy. I might get a yellow one.
I'm drinking a red, Mauricio's drinking a white, and AJ's drinking a blue and silver.
What's Kyle drinking? What's Kyle drinking?
Tonight I pulled out actually I'm almost done this bottle too. I pulled out the Booker's, little Booker's bourbon, actually really nice bourbon. So only the best for you guys. So cheers.
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 Yeah. Well, let's start things off here with the U.S. dollar. So the printing of dollars during COVID and the sanctions in Russia and agreements between BRICS countries to trade outside the dollar, they've sparked this kind of on again, off again discussion about de-dollarization. Mauricio, as investors, is this something we should really be concerned about, or is this kind of a too far off thing that we could just say, that's future Mauricio problems?
Yeah, I'm glad you said on again, off again, because that's exactly right. These headlines pop up every so often, and there's a huge difference between like headlines that people literally just don't even read the articles versus reality, right? And the reality is that, BRICS has been around since I think 2009 or something, and they've been talking about it. They get together every year. They always talk about wanting to de-dollarize. And look, I get it. Not nobody, but everybody wants to de-dollarize. There's just too much benefit. The U.S. has been abusing it. Everybody wants to get away from the system. But the problem is it's so entrenched in the system that it's really, really difficult for this to happen, at least in the short term. Will it happen eventually? Jay and I were kind of discussing this earlier this week. Sure, at some point it's going to happen, right? So the dollar, the reserve currency, usually doesn't last more. I think I heard the average is about 150 years. We've had it basically since the 40s. So we're about 90 years into it. But there's so many ways we can go with this. This is probably like a 3-hour discussion, and I'm happy to geek out for 3 hours, but we don't have that time. So I'm just gonna harp on one point, and that is the amount of dollarized debt that's out there in the world. This is probably one of the main reasons why the dollar has sort of inherent demand, and which is why you kind of see the dollar spiking, and people still want dollars. And that is that people always forget, and I'll spend 60 seconds on this because this is an important point. People forget that, if you ask people like, how does money get created? How does a dollar get created? And most people have no clue. right? And it's not like in the old days where you had a gold system where the only way you could expand the money supply, you had to literally dig the gold out of the ground. The way we create dollars these days is through loans. Every dollar is lent into existence, right? And so what happens is and this doesn't happen in the U.S., what's happened over the years is there's actually more debt, U.S. denominated debt, outside of the United States than there is inside the United States. There's something called the euro dollar market, which we don't have time to get into, but essentially when you have an offshore bank making a loan to an offshore company. So let's say you have a Brazilian company that needs a loan. They get a loan from like a bank from the Cayman Islands. That loan is actually creating dollars, right? And then when that dollar gets paid off, it actually gets rid of the dollar. And so that creates an inherent demand for the dollar because that debt has to get repaid. And the way you can repay that, your mortgage payment, your loan payment, you need dollars to make that repayment. And so the idea that somebody can just suddenly say, yeah, you know what, we're going to stop using the dollar. It's like if you and I decided to say, you know what, I don't like Visa and MasterCard. So let's stop using Visa and MasterCard. I'm about to go to Cabo for a week. Let me just use some other drunk real estate credit card that I have, and I'll take that instead of the the Visa MasterCard. Nobody uses it, right? There's no demand for my drunk real estate credit card, and so there's an inherent demand. The more dollars that get created through loans, the more implicit demand because those dollars have to get paid back and they have to get serviced. And so that's kind of a major point. And obviously, when debts get paid back, or with a de-dollarization system, if you suddenly say, well, screw it, let's just default, we won't pay the dollars back. Well, when you don't pay dollars back, those dollars disappear, right? That means that somebody's not going to, one of these banks, one of these companies is not going to get their dollars back, and they're going to lose that dollar system that's in the United States, and the money supply is going to contract, which is going to be a major issue. So the dollar denominated debt and the fact that there's more dollars circulating outside the United States than inside the United States, I think is a huge reason why there's such a huge demand for dollars, and it's not something you just decide willy-nilly from one moment to the next to move on. So there's a couple other points I want to make, but I wanted to make sure, if you guys had some pushback on that. But that's kind of, for me, one of the biggest reasons why there's such a strong demand for the dollar, and getting away from it's going to take more than a couple years, more than a couple decades. I think the over-under is it going to happen in our lifetimes?
So I want to add in a few points to this. When the biggest thing with the dollar is who? If not the dollar, then who? And the United States is unique for a whole bunch of reasons, but the security on capital is one of the biggest reasons, meaning that, geography speaking, the United States is outrageously isolated and protected. And it has been able to be very stable for very long because of that. And the contracts that we have got with the other countries after World War II, which is all the first world countries, put into place a protection system through our Navy, which is 10 times X, for global trade as long as everybody used the dollar. And that created a new world banking system that was built on the United States. So we totally left the old system and created a new one, which is predicated both not only in capital and actually infrastructure and banking and the abilities to initiate and do it, but also the military and protecting it. And if we aren't it, then who does the world go to? Well, as it sits today, the only contender would be the euro, which is 21%, which ended up being in a whole bunch of trouble and kind of became a joke because it almost fell apart. Really good during good times, but horrific during bad times. And Germany's the only one even keeping it afloat. So the euro is a really bad choice if you're looking at stable long-term currencies because of its lack of centralized decision-making, borrowing, and everything else, meaning that you could have a handful of countries that would just tank the whole thing, which almost happened in 2008, right? They didn't even know where their money was coming from or taxes, and it was a really big mess. So if it's not the dollar, then who? And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, China. The yen only makes up 5% or less of global currency. Outside the euro, the yen is the next biggest at 5 or 6%. There's nothing else. And two, that's a communist country, and the big thing about using currency is stability, which our government provides that in a very unique way. So the modern world and currencies were predicated on the United States system. Yeah. It would be, to say we just switch over is not That's not quite how it works. It would be a very bad day if we did that for the world.
Here's the thing. So I agree that if not the dollar, then what or who. We don't have to worry, I don't think, about any existing currencies taking over for the dollar anytime soon, for the simple reason that if you have a currency, if you're a government that has a central bank that has a currency that's backed by the dollar, like the euro, like the yuan, like pretty much every other currency out there in existence today, you can't basically your currency is pegged to the dollar, and you can't decide that you're no longer going to peg your currency to the dollar unilaterally, because if you do that, like you said, AJ, you have no idea what your currency is worth. You know what it's worth when it's pegged to the dollar because the dollar's stable. But the day you decide we're no longer pegged to the dollar, we're no longer going to be reliant or backed by the dollar, we don't know what the yuan's worth. We don't know what the euro is worth because it's not pegged to anything anymore. So I'm not concerned about any existing currency taking over for the dollar. My bigger concern is that, and again, we go back to what Mauricio was saying, was the BRICS countries. And when we talk about BRICS, it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, if you want to throw South Africa in. Between those 5 countries, they've kind of gotten together and they said, hey, let's trade amongst us and let's consider creating a new currency that's not backed by the dollar. Now, Mauricio gave the example of, well, what if you have this credit card that's not Visa or MasterCard, it's drunk real estate credit card and nobody uses it? Well, here's the thing. Those 5 countries control about 31% of the world's GDP. So could we use a drunk real estate credit card? Yeah, if 31% of the country accepted it, we could probably start using it, and it would take some luster away from Visa and MasterCard.
Jay, you wouldn't be able to use it on existing debt. Like if we suddenly decided to use a BRICS, denominated debt, let's say in the United States, just suddenly a magic wand gets waved and we're now using a BRICS currency. Guess what? My mortgage is still denominated in dollars. I've still got to pay my mortgage to the bank in dollars. I can't just suddenly say, you know what, I'm going to pay you in BRICS dollars. The bank's going to be like, I don't care. So yeah, moving forward, every new loan theoretically could be like, well, instead of taking out dollar loans, because that's what's happening right now. When you have like I mentioned, a Brazilian corporation that wants a loan, they're going to get it in dollars because they're going to get better. The lender doesn't want to lend in Brazilian real or yuan or euros because there's too much currency fluctuation. AJ was talking about the security and the stabilization of the dollar. So lenders want to lend in dollars. Otherwise, the interest rate's going to be like crazy because they're going to get paid in devalued dollars. So it just perpetuates the system. So yeah, theoretically, future loans can be making BRICS currencies or whatever, but that's not happening. That's the issue.
We're not talking about this happening overnight, though. That's the thing. It's not like it's just going to be like a cut. Everyone's going to cut ties and just start paying in this new currency. The problem is that we just keep pushing our luck so much. And we keep doing more and more things to piss off more countries. And eventually, yes, we don't have a better alternative right now, but eventually we're going to push enough countries over the brink or the bricks, and that eventually they're going to look for more alternatives and they're going to come up with better alternatives. We still have...
They've been looking for more alternatives for the last 20, 30 years. They don't want this system. They've known this for a while. They would love to get rid. Everybody, look, that's what you've seen. They would love to get a new system, but it's easier said than done. It's just because you talk about it. The BRICS have been talking about it for the last 14 years. They get together every year. They have this thing. Let's start a new currency. They talk a big game. And what's happened? Zero, nada.
And over that time, everybody loaded up on dollars. So this is the thing. The countries say we don't like it, but they take out more dollars. And so what we're talking about is, oh, well, we don't like that it's the dollar, but yet they're actually stacking up on more dollars. So when we did during COVID, guess what we did? We backed the entire world's currency. We shipped out hundreds of billions of dollars and didn't back the banks. We backed the actual currencies of the countries and shored them up so that they could continue loaning and doing it. So we actually became more entrenched in the world economy. And when you look at the BRICS, here's the problem with the BRICS. You're talking about China, Brazil, and Russia. I mean, and a unified currency around countries like that. I mean,
Right. What if you start adding some more stable countries, though? What if all of a sudden we piss off Germany enough, and what if we piss off the UK enough, and what if they start adding into the BRICS, or they start their own thing? The point is that we're heading down a direction that you talk about during COVID. Like we devalued our money by 30%. The only reason that we got away with it is because everybody else did, and we're the reserve currency.
That's exactly right. Everybody else devalued their money just as much, if not more than we did, which is one of the reasons why the DXY changes, because it's related to other currencies. So we've been printing money like crazy. So has Europe. So has Germany. So has Japan.
Yeah. I don't think anybody, at least amongst the four of us, there are plenty of people out there, but amongst the four of us, it sounds like we all agree that the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency, the main currency on the planet, isn't going away anytime soon. The bigger question is there going to be another currency or currencies that gain enough, let's call it market share, that the dollar becomes less valuable? And I think that happens when China and Russia decide to start exchanging goods and services in some new currency. Or when Russia says to Germany or the EU, you want to buy gas from us? We don't want your dollars. If you want to buy gas from us, you need to start using this other currency. Or when China says, hey, you want to buy all these cheap widget crap that we make in our factories? We're not going to accept dollars for those anymore. We're going to accept this other currency. And then all these other first world countries, our allies, are going to have to make some really difficult choices. Do they stop trading oil with Russia and crap with China, or do they start trading in some other currency, or do they negotiate some compromise? And
so where does it go, Jay? Where, like, let's say they decide, what happens to the dollars? Let's say that Iraq or Iran or Saudi Arabia suddenly say, we don't want these dollars anymore. What do you think happens to those dollars? Do they just disappear? No, they're going to sell it to somebody else who wants them, right? It's not like the dollars suddenly just disappear and are no longer around. Those are just debt. So the only way you'd able to do that, it would have two countries that say, we're going to trade with each other and we're going to start extending loans in yuan, or we're going to extend loans.
But these treasuries expire, though. Once they expire, they're replaced by others. And if no one wants to replace the other ones.
We're not talking about treasuries. We're talking about a Cayman Island bank that lends money to a Chinese corporation for $100 million. That's a loan between a bank and that company. That's got nothing to do with the U.S., got nothing to do with the Treasury. That company has to pay back the Cayman Islands bank or any other lender that gives them in dollars.
So they pay it off.
Right, but in order to pay it off, they need dollars.
And then whatever the new currency is, the bank converts it into that currency and then uses that. Like it's.
So who's the number one holder, though, of treasuries and the U.S. currency?
Japan.
I think China's still up there.
No, not even close. It's the U.S.
Well, yeah.
Well, obviously in the U.S., so, I mean foreign.
First of all, in order to make this up, if China, if Britain, if Brazil all said, screw you, we're not using dollars, that would have such a minimal impact on that overall. You're talking about, first of all, even if they went in their own. But Britain can't just do that. So the euro has very, very good contracts with the United States. First is we are their military. And in order to have their military, so Russia and other people don't invade them, and also so they can have free trade, which didn't exist until the United States Navy, which is 10 times larger than the entire world's Navy combined, opened up free trade and opened up free markets. It was all done, and we said, we're not going to take over your country. We'll give it back. Here's the rules, though. You have to use our money. If you don't...
Yeah, but that's changing. Look at the petrodollar. Like Saudi Arabia had the same agreement with the U.S. that, hey, you use the petrodollar, we'll give you our military, we'll protect your oil exports, we'll do our exports, and we'll take care of you. Well, what's happening now? Saudi Arabia is trading in local currencies. They're trading with China. They're trading with Russia. Like, they don't give a fuck now. And so, like, that changes. It's okay for us to flex our muscles back in the day when everyone still had wars on the mind. But this is a new age.
We're not buying oil in anything other than dollars right now. The world is still using the dollar to buy. We haven't switched over to start pricing oil in any other currency.
Like, okay, the world, but in between countries, though, they are trading it. The same countries that were before. Saudi Arabia was only doing U.S. dollars. Now they're doing direct currencies with other countries. China and Russia, they're going direct. They're not going to U.S. dollars anymore. Like it's happening, and that was like the petrodollar was the whole reason that we held on to the reserve currency. If you remember, like, well, obviously we're not going to remember, but when we went off the gold standard, everyone was shitting bricks, literally. That the U.S. the whole reason that they went to the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency is because it was pegged to gold. And we don't need to peg to gold because the U.S. dollar is pegged to gold. Well, they went off the gold standard, and everyone's like, oh, well, like that's kind of not what we signed up for. And then they made this petrodollar agreement with Saudi Arabia that oil's now traded in dollars, and that added stability to the U.S. dollars, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Well, we're losing that too.
Here's what scares me the most. And we haven't even touched on this. We keep ignoring this country, but pop quiz. Over the next 20 years, what country's economy is likely to grow the most?
India.
India,
China.
by far.
India.
No, India.
China's going down.
I think China's probably going down also, but India is growing tremendously. And I mentioned earlier that those BRICS countries now account for 31% of GDP. It's going to be over 50% in the next 20 years. And at that point, they are going to have the majority of the GDP controlled by those four countries. And then we have Mexico, who is they're backing off now. But a couple months ago, they said, yeah, we'd consider a BRICS currency. And we have a couple other relatively large South American countries that have said, yeah, we'll consider it. I mean, they could realistically.
And what if they peg it to the dollar? Or sorry, what if they peg it to gold?
Well, if they peg
then
it,
they won't be able to loan.
Exactly.
That's great.
Somebody is going to have to loan that currency into existence, and it's going to take a while for the real economy, for the banks and for the lenders to say, oh yeah, I'm going to lend you in this currency. You're going to pay me back in this new currency.
But we just piss off enough people. We steal enough of foreign currency reserves.
Like, haven't they done it already? It's easy.
You keep saying
really
piss off,
easy
but
to
the
say.
question is
really
like we say, piss off who? We're literally
Pissed off
supplying
everyone.
Europe protection from Russia. Europe's actually increasing their reserves. So did we piss off China and Russia? Yeah, that's true. We did. And guess what?
If you want to talk about, let's talk about Russia, because Russia, like whatever. Okay, obviously what they're doing and what they started is awful, but at the same time, we stole their money. They had reserves that was their money, and we literally took it from them. So, like as a world, like just like. How are we allowed to just steal money from another country that's not ours? Like, I don't know. Like, I would be worried if I was another country. Sure, we're allies with the U.S. right now, but you don't have to go that far back with Germany that we weren't allies forever. And they look at that and then, shit, maybe I shouldn't be keeping all these reserves along with the U.S. because the U.S. could just be like, oh, we don't like what you're doing. You are no longer have access to your own money.
I agree 100% with you on that. I think what we did with Russia is, I think even us just giving all the money we're giving to Russia is so ridiculous. But I actually don't think Europe, I'm not worried at all. But Jay, I 100% agree with you in India. I don't think the BRICS don't bother me. India does, though, alone. India will be the world superpower in the next 50 years.
And India is the I in BRICS.
Do you think
India will? But I don't think India will.
Do you think India will want access to the U.S. markets?
That's what's keeping us. Our relationship with India is the most important out of China. No, Russia. No, I'm not worried. Brazil, I love you. I so love you, Brazil. But outside Mardi Gras, or not Mardi Gras, but outside Carnival, no. But India
and Rihanna.
Yeah, India. On the other hand, though, is growing and will be. It's going to be what everyone, I think, feared China would be. And China
I think it's time to go down around the horn then. So first, A, each person, do we think it's ever going to happen? And B, what's the time frame of when the U.S. is going to lose the dollar? Let's start with Jay.
So I'm not worried about losing the reserve currency anytime in the next 25 years. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and say at some point during the lifetime of this podcast, we're going to look back and realize that the value of the dollar is lower than it is today because and Mauricio's looking around. I think this podcast is going to last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, that was my first thing. This podcast might be done by next week, so I'm not sure that's.
I'm optimistic. 5 or 10 years of this podcast. No, I think in the next 10 years we're going to look back and we're gonna recognize that the dollar has lost value because other countries are trading in other currencies.
But will it still be the reserve currency. Loss
100%.
value.
I think we'll be the reserve currency for at least the next 25 years.
AJ, you agree?
Yeah, I don't think that we have any short term. Now, well, I think anything's possible, but I think it would result in basically a world war if it got to that point.
Yeah.
Now, in the short term. Now, in the long term, nothing is forever. Nothing, right? I believe it is only a matter of time because everything changes. But I don't think in our lifetime. Now, I agree with Jay, though. I bet you anything, the dollar will be worth less in 10 years than it is today. But I don't think that means it won't be the world's reserve currency.
100% agree.
Heavy pause between worth and less. Mauricio, you backing these guys up?
Probably not. I'm just trying to share my screen. Let me try square my screen. I'm looking at because now you guys switch from the reserve currency to
Our old guy tech wizard at it again.
To the DXY, right? So you're talking about the DXY here that if we're looking at the screen right now, it's at 103. It's been as low as, so you're saying that the DXY from 103 will be lower in 10 years?
Yeah.
Is that the bet?
Yeah.
You taking an over or under on that?
De-dollarization, not loss.
He's betting a 3-star Michelin meal with you.
Oh, we should definitely bet that. Could we, or at least a dinner at Nobu or something?
There you go.
I'm going to say that look, are we talking about the value of the dollar against other currencies like a DXY?
See, this is just what Jay brought up. If you were to take that back, I was just asking: are we going to lose reserve currency? And if so, when do you think it's going to happen?
So the answer to the question is 100% yes. We are. Every single currency loses its reserve currency at some point. Like I mentioned earlier, the average is 150. Sometimes it's 300. Sometimes it's less. But the real over/under in my mind was: is it going to happen within our lifetime? And then Jay was like, "Well, you mean AJ's or Mauricio's?" But I think, look, let's do it this way. By the turn of the century or not, and I'm going to say that's the over-under. I think it's a 50-50 shot that it happens by, the year 2100, and that's the over-under where I think it's a 50-50 before or after that.
So I agree with you that every country has lost reserve currency at some point. And many times, if not all the times, it has been because of a war, a major war, world war, whatever, basically the British pound sterling or whatever it was, that they had to go so far into debt. They were 270% of GDP at one point. So that precipitated it. And so to me, the question is, are we going to be in a world war in our lifetime? And 5 years ago, I might have said no, but after recent events in the last few years, I think it's going to happen. I think we're looking at that 25, 30 year range that something's going to happen, and we're going to see a completely new world financial system. So
I agree. I agree with that, but I think it's for other reasons that have to do with population change and debt structures that are going to be catastrophic across the world in the next 50 years.
Okay, so AJ and I are putting the over-under on loss of reserve currency at 25 years. Mauricio's doing like 75 years. Kyle, you sound like you're maybe even shorter term than that.
I think it would be the end of my lifetime if it happens.
Fair enough. All right. Let's move on. So we had a whole discussion about how office occupancies are tanking. So there's a growing discourse about how empty office spaces can just get converted into other uses and whether or not that's a feasible thing and whether that's could become normal. So typically discussions are around converting office to multifamily just because we have such a housing shortage and it seems like the hot topic. But AJ, I know you've been doing some stuff converting some office buildings to self-storage. So do you think this is a real trend that is happening, or is it just a real specialized thing that's not really going to catch on as a long-term option?
So I think, first of all, I think that it's not only a real option, it's already happening. So there's a lot of good information, and I have some that I'm also going to try to share with you guys because it's really cool, especially as it relates to the office to multifamily. And really what we're looking for on that is the spread of rents right? So what is the rent per square foot on an office building versus the rent per square foot that you could achieve through other asset classes? So when we're looking at conversions, we've done conversions on office buildings. I've done conversions on bankrupt retail centers. And really what you're looking at as the price to acquire that asset is valued on its net income, right? So as those rents get lower and lower and lower, the value of those assets drop because of the driver of the revenue is just not producing anything. So that net income is going. And then if you're looking at it saying it can only deliver X amount of revenue per square foot, but yet there's another asset class in another real estate asset class that building can be used for, and we can deliver more revenue can be driven from that use than this use. That spread, in the simplest terms, is the opportunity for conversion. So when we looked at this in retail, originally speaking with some retail owners, they thought that their buildings were worth $20 million because that was predicated on large supercenters renting them out and getting net income that made a value of $20 million. Once those large supercenters pulled out and there was nobody to fill it, then the argument came, all right, it's not worth 20. What is it? Well, that went all the way down, and we finally ended up buying it at $8 million. And we could sell off the land, and we could turn the whole thing into a storage for $8 million that immediately turned around and made it worth 30. So that's what we did. And we are doing this with office. We purchased an office building on Main intersection, 5 acres, right in the heart of COVID. When this was happening for $4 million, I'm in the middle of converting it, which its value we'll have about 12 million into it, but it'll be well over.
Are you converting these or just knocking them down and building?
No, we're converting. We're using the existing structures. We're building them out. And
out of curiosity, how do you do that on the self-storage? That seems fascinating that you'd be able to take a maybe they're not multi-story, but how do you talk a little bit about how do you do it with the self-storage?
Yeah, so the one we're doing now is multi-story. We have large industrial elevators. It's indoor climate controlled, and this was a very unique one. So this was actually a newspaper company that right in the first 3 months when COVID started, they shut everything down and banks were going under. They were having troubles, and the bank was worried because they didn't think that anybody was going to lease it up in office because of COVID. And so they wanted to get rid of it. We came in and bought it because the newspaper company had to get the same permitting and zoning as storage, which is really weird, but it's because they had to put their printing machine in the back of the building where they did the distribution of newspapers. Totally weird loophole. And so that allowed us to, so we came in, bought it out, and then we gutted all the walls, and we scrapped that thing down just to the structure. And then inside we do all the metal work and formatting for storage. And on the other levels, we have large industrial side elevators, and we actually built another floor in one section of it. So you could go up floors and you have access to those units. And as long as we stayed within the walls of the storage, the city couldn't say no. So that's how we got away with that one.
Yeah, I think
go ahead, Jay. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think a couple of the challenges, and I love like converting from office or from some other use to a similar use. So office to, I don't want to say office to self-storage is similar, but in terms of requirements, it is more similar than something like, let's say, multifamily. Because when you get into residential, you have a couple issues. Number one, and maybe the biggest, is that typically the sewer and plumbing requirements for multifamily are significantly different than office, significantly different than retail or industrial. I mean, in a mall, you might have 5 or 6 total bathrooms. In a multifamily, obviously, you're going to have multiple bathrooms in every unit, and people could be taking 50 showers at the same time. And so the requirements for like a certain size sewer and the amount of water, incoming water line has to be a certain size. So it can be difficult to do a conversion to multifamily, but going from like office to industrial or warehouse or self-storage or even retail, that seems really interesting. The other issue with multifamily, because I know a lot of people talk about converting from office to multifamily, is just the aesthetics A lot of times when you look in an office building, what you see on the outside isn't necessarily going to be conducive to building residential, because the windows aren't placed in the right location. There isn't enough egress or the right egress to build multiple units. And so you end up basically having to I don't want to say tear down the structure, but you're spending almost an equivalent amount to tear down the structure. So what we're seeing, and Kyle and I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago who is doing this on a much larger scale. What we're seeing is that a lot of times the conversions that we're seeing to multifamily from office and other structures are these older buildings that have a lot of character, that have large crawl spaces under them, like these 100-year-old buildings that have large crawl spaces under them, so that you can pull mechanicals, you can pull plumbing. It's a lot easier access to upgrade these buildings. And then the character of the buildings, just the prettiness of the buildings, makes it a lot easier to convert. Because
you know why that's happening too is you see it a lot in New York, which obviously it's a huge problem in New York. They have a lot of vacant office buildings, but New York has these tax incentives for maintaining historic buildings. And you hit the nail on the head there about knocking buildings down. Like if you actually read most of these articles about converting to multifamily, it says, oh, office building converted to multifamily. If you actually read the article, 9 times out of 10, they knocked it down and they built new. Yeah. So you're basically getting into the situation where you have to buy these office buildings for the price of the land in order to make this work. The only time it's not like that the land is so valuable. So you're downtown Manhattan, or you're downtown in one of these major cities where you could charge $4,000 or $5,000 in rent, then the numbers actually make sense that you can convert these existing buildings. But when you're talking about converting multifamily, I looked up the studies on it. Like only one, depending on who you listen to, only 1 to 5% of buildings are even candidates to be converted to multifamily.
Yeah, it's funny. I came across, when I was looking into this, the CBRE actually came out back in November with a stat that said that only 42 conversions had been completed in the entire country.
So I have all those figures I can show you.
Only
right
217 were planned. But I have a solution. But AJ, if you wanted to give your stat, then I've got a great solution for you guys on this whole issue.
Well, so the solution, the first solution though for multifamily, just to finish up the multifamily discussion, is just tax incentives. If we do have such a problem with a shortage of housing and we have a surplus of vacant office buildings, the only way that it's going to work is by changing the tax incentives to convert these buildings.
So here's the problem, though. So multifamily, when you're looking at the conversions of office buildings, we can look at the functional part, right? That's great. The problem is, though, you're dealing with politics, and functional has no place in the brains of politicians. So they don't like those standardized things. They're motivated by things like taxes and usage. So industrial and self-storage, they absolutely hate. And the reason being is they are the lowest producer in tax revenue of any asset class. So they do not want storage to be in office buildings. Why? You're taking something that produces astronomical amounts of taxes for the city to the absolute lowest or tax yield per square foot. So cities will not, they just do not let this happen. The only reason we even got it was because they couldn't tell us no. Other than that, I have not seen or heard of anyone being able to achieve approvals for it. While multifamily, they do want it because of the usage and the taxes. Now, it doesn't mean that they can effectively get that done, but the cities want it. Now, this is...
It happened in the 80s, though, in New York. In New York, we had a similar issue with all of these vacant office buildings, and they did give tax incentives, and they did get all the tax revenue, and it's shown that the tax revenue that they've gained from making those conversions since the 80s has more than oversold the tax incentives that they gave to the people who made the conversions.
And that's the big push for the cities right now. So if you look and you can see, if anything, you can see from the numbers here from 2016 to today, right? 2023, right? This is now a big push. This is a big change we're seeing in the overall utilization. And it also shows the lack of faith in office buildings. People are giving them up. People are starting to look at this. I have talked to a lot of people with office buildings that want to convert them somehow or get rid of them. They're sitting empty, and no one has faith that they're going to fill up anytime soon, and definitely not back at the amount. I think one of the problems we have is we overbuilt office for a new age, right? The same thing happened with retail. Like when we're converting big box office retail, everybody's like, oh yeah, because of the retail apocalypse, right? It doesn't exist anymore. That's not true. Retail is still there. The problem is we overbuilt retail in the 90s, 10x what like Canada had or anybody else. And people said, well, it's just because, we as Americans, we consume a lot. No, it was overbuilt. And the debt structures placed on them fueled a development cycle in that asset class that was not correlated to demand. And then when Amazon and the internet came, it crushed it. Well, we're seeing very much the same thing in office, not nearly to the extent, obviously, but the usage that was built for in the past, including what the yield could get, is not how we work and how we do things today. So you can see in 2023, right, the number of conversions that are planned and what they're looking for, that's really starting to rise. And I think that the problem is functionally. How do we do this? How do you get it done? I think, Kyle, the change of the change up, there has to be more incentive given by the cities if they want that desired. And as far as functionally going, how do you do that with the sewer and the water? I don't have the expertise on that. I'm not in multifamily, but I've always known that's how do you do that? So the cost of conversion will not allow for its utilization unless you get that asset for nothing. Once again, for us to convert a big box store, which they believed was worth, even when it sat empty for 5 years, 20 million, and before that they viewed it was worth way more, we had to get it down to 8 only because we could sell the land off for 5 million.
Right. You got it for the cost of the land, basically.
Yes. So when you look at that, that's the problem. And the government doesn't seem to figure out here, how are we going to, they just say, well, just put apartments in those offices and it should just work, right?
Well, the good news is the good news is the great state of California has come up with a solution, and so all of you guys should come over to California because
they're always on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, so we're always on the cutting edge. So there's already a bill introduced. It's called the Office to Housing Conversion Act, which will make sure that the permitting process and everything will be much smoother. And that's even more fun is they've already created. See if I can share my screen here. They've already created a $400 million. I'm not going to share my screen. A $400 million fund that the state of California put together to help with the conversions from office to specifically to multifamily or housing. So there's already been, 55 applicants at this point that are put in.
I have a question though. How are they going to solve the fact? So yes, these office buildings are only 60% occupied, 50% occupied. How are you going to convert a building that has 50% occupancy? Yeah. You can't just kick the tenancy out. These leases sometimes go 10 years.
We're
15
in California.
years.
Do you think we care about any of that stuff? We're in California.
We
write a bill.
Contracts.
We change the law. We say, hey, if we're going to convert, then you have the right to kick somebody out, and it's all solved. It's all these issues are solved. Just come to California. Come to California. Plenty of good stuff.
All right, fair enough. So I guess the moral of the story is it's not as easy as everyone thinks. And if you can get it for the cost of the land, sure, but if it's any more expensive than that, then probably not.
Yeah, I think the point here is simply just like you said. We talk about this. We talk a good game. Everybody's assuming that there's going to be tons of office conversion because what else could we do? I think the reality is that it's harder than a lot of people who aren't on the ground dealing with it every day recognize. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to look back in 5 or 10 years and we're going to think, yeah, it sounded good in theory, but it didn't really happen very often.
So it sounds
Outside
exactly
math
like,
of
wait a minute,
government
it sounds exactly like the de-dollarization conversation we had. It sounds like a good idea. Everybody's talking a big game, but then they realize it's a lot harder than they think. And 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back and be like, oh, that maybe it wasn't a good idea.
We're just debunking media myths right now is what we're doing. Let's move on to something a little bit more tangible then. We can't get it through a full episode without at least one discussion about loans and interest rates and stuff like that. So when most people talk about how the rise in rates has killed cash flow, they're talking about actual loan payments just because the interest rate went up. Well, there's actually this smaller silent killer of cash flow, as people have called it, that might be even worse in some cases. So that is called interest rate caps. So Jay, can you break down what an interest rate cap is? Because most people actually don't even know what it is, and why are they even important in this case?
Yeah, so an interest rate cap is basically an insurance policy. So when we get in the multifamily space, or I should say in the commercial space, when we get these floating rate loans, which are these loans where the interest payments go up and down based on some index. Basically, if interest rates go up, we pay more in our monthly mortgage. If interest rates go down, we pay less in our monthly mortgage. The risk to the lender is obviously if rates go up a lot, like they have in the last year and a half, potentially we could be paying so much in interest that we can't afford to pay it. And lenders don't want the borrowers to get in the situation where they can't pay their mortgage because interest rates have gone up so much and they can't afford it. So lenders often require that if borrowers get these floating rate loans, that they take out these insurance policies called rate caps. And basically what these policies do is they say, okay, the day that you take the loan out, we're going to peg the interest rate for your loan at whatever the rate is that day. And if the rate goes up, and you can buy different insurance policies, but if the rate goes up 1% or 2% or 3%, depending on what policy you buy, you're going to be responsible for paying that additional 1 or 2 or 3%. But anything above that 1 or 2 or 3%, if it goes up that high, so it's above that 1 or 2 or 3%, then insurance is going to kick in and they're going to start paying for it. So maybe you get a loan at 4%, you buy a 2% rate cap, which means one day if rates go up, you may have to pay up to 6%. But if it goes above 6%, insurance is going to cover it. So you never have to worry about paying more than that 6% in that case. And so that protects the lender, that protects the borrower. And so this was never really a big deal because back when interest rates were low and interest rates weren't very volatile, what we were seeing was these insurance policies, these rate cap insurance policies were really cheap. So to give a real life example, Kyle and I own a multifamily in Houston that we got a floating rate loan on in 2020 during COVID. And I think we paid, it was for a 1% increase above the rate, then insurance would cover it above that. And it was a 3-year policy, and we paid, I think, $30,000 per year. Is that right, Kyle?
Not even. It was like 27,000 or something.
$27,000.
And you know what the funny thing was is at the time we were debating whether it was worth it to get the 1% of the 2% because the 2% was only 17,000. So we were going to save 10 grand because we thought there was no way that in that 3 years that interest rates would go up.
Yeah, exactly. But here we are 3 years later. That insurance policy, because interest rates have gone up so high, has saved us literally hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Over $1 million.
Over $1 million.
It's the best investment we've ever made. We paid $27,000 and we've made over $1 million on it.
Yep. But here we are 3 years later, and that insurance policy was a 3-year policy. It's getting ready to expire, and the lender is now requiring that we buy a new policy because we have to have a policy in place. This one's about to expire. Well, that $27,000 policy from 3 years ago, as of a couple months ago, was close to $600,000. Which means we were taking $50,000 a month to pay for this insurance policy. This property is generating low 6 figures of net income. So basically half of our profit was going to pay this insurance policy. Luckily, we had enough profit that we could cover it. We could still make payments to our investors, but there are operators out there, there are investors and owners out there who are seeing their rate caps when they expire and they have to buy a new policy go up to $500,000, $800,000, $1 million, $2 million, literally ridiculous amounts. And for some operators, it's going up so high that not only is it eating into their cash flow, it's eating into all their cash flow, and now they're cash flow negative. They can't afford, they're making no profit after they pay for this new insurance policy. And so now they're in a situation where, just like if they hadn't taken out the insurance policy and interest rates had gone through the roof, they can no longer afford to keep this property.
And I definitely have a comment about that. But quick question, Jay. I mean, and to you, Kyle, too. Now that interest rates, even according to the Fed, are close to peak, or even maybe have already peaked, has that changed the landscape? I mean, right? I mean, obviously, when you're at 1% and you're trying to buy a cap to cover you to go to 3 or 4, but now that we're at Fed funds is at what, 5.25, mortgage rates or whatever, are those still pretty expensive? Because I would assume nobody's thinking interest rates are going to go to 9 or 10, or maybe they are.
Yeah. So the nice thing about, well, no, I'd say what we've seen, and the nice thing based on what we've seen, I heard a talk by J.P. Conklin, who was a senior guy over at Pensford, and he's probably one of the foremost experts in the world on.
Philly guy too.
Say it again.
He's a Philly guy.
Yep. But he was saying that the rate cap, the insurance policy, is driven by two things: basically what the rates actually are, and the volatility of those rates, like the likelihood of them to go up or down, and how big a swing. And it's basically 1/3, 2/3. So the actual rate itself drives the price of it by about a third.
Well, I think when you're saying the actual rate, you're meaning the forward rate. So like the 2-year. So if you're talking about a 2-year rate cap policy, you want to look at the 2-year Treasury. If you're talking about a 5-year, look at the 5-year, 1 year. That's the rate you're talking about.
Exactly. But then 2/3 of the cost of that insurance policy is driven by volatility. If we're in a highly volatile market, and which we've been in the last year and a half, because the Fed has indicated that they're going to keep raising and raising and raising. And they have been raising and raising and raising. So it's been a highly volatile market. So the prices of these insurance policies have been super high. Luckily, now that the Fed has kind of let off the gas a little bit, they paused for a month last month. They've kind of indicated that while there may be 1 or 2 more hikes to come, we're hopefully substantially done with the hikes. Volatility has dropped considerably. And this rate cap that I was mentioning that a couple months ago we were looking at paying about $560,000 for, is now down, I think, to about $210,000. So,
but the 2-year,
that's still 10x from what.
But the 2-year is the problem with that was, though, is everyone believed them that there's only 2 more hikes, but then they all of a sudden also believe them that we're not going to be cutting rates at the back end of this year. So a lot of these, if you have to buy a 1-year cap, all of a sudden the forward curve for 1 year, the amount that you'd have to pay for that 1 year spiked as well. So you have this constant like push and pull where volatility goes down, but then the actual rates go up. And so they end up, we have this thing where we're almost range bound for the last 4 months, where you're like, oh my God, volatility went down 30%. My rate cap must be down this much. Well, but then you look at the actual 2-year Treasury, that one spiked and it offset whatever gains you got.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, just a quick comment on boots on the ground. I mean, what you were saying, Jay, in terms of the cost, from your example, that it went from 27 grand to 600, and for some people, when their renewal's up, it might be $1 million or $2 million, and they're underwater. I mean, that's the number one reason we are seeing our clients call us and say, hey, look, we need to do a cash call. We don't have $600,000 laying around. We can't get it from net operating income. So we've got to go raise it somehow. And so we're talking to clients about, hey, do we go get it? Do we get a loan from another party? Do we just do a cash call? I mean, probably the number one reason people are doing cash calls these days is because of this interest, this rate cap issue that you're talking about. So it's very,
to me, the bigger thing has been reserves. Like what, and to be honest, like I'll admit, like I understood what a rate cap was, but we've never dealt with this where we've had interest rate like increases so quickly that we've had to consider this possibility where what the lender actually does is they reset every 6 months and they look and say, okay, what's the new rate cap going to be when your rate cap expires? And they make you start setting aside to be able to purchase that. So what happened with us is when rates were so low and it was middle of COVID, we were setting aside $900 a month, $900 a month. And then all of a sudden interest rates started to go up and they were like, okay, it goes from 900 to 9 grand. And we're like, oh geez, 9 grand, that's tough, but okay, whatever. And then to Jay's point, all of a sudden we had to replace 600,000 in the next 6 months. So then we started it went to 57,000 and then it went to 78,000. So they were having us set aside monthly 78,000 into a reserve account just to make sure that we could purchase a new rate cap. And they've never dealt with this either. So they have in their docs, we have to set aside to be able to purchase 2-year rate cap, even though legally in the contract, we only have to set aside we only have to purchase a 1-year rate cap. So we're over setting aside how much we actually have to do it. But the banks are like, this is the way it is. But we're like, this has never happened before. You're making us set aside $78,000 a month when our loan payments are only $100,000. So like you're basically doubling our loan payments for something that we don't have to actually pay. So to me, when we talk about cash flow killers, like, yes, we're not technically losing that money because we're setting aside for a future payment and a lot can happen and we don't have to buy that full thing. But we don't have that, like, just that amount of cash flow to just throw us aside. And anybody who was on a bridge loan who had thin cash flows, like we owned that property for 2.5 years before this happened. So we were fine. But I think of somebody who owned it for 1 year and this happened, like they got to be hurting.
And what about the tax? What about the tax implication too? Because obviously, if you're setting that money aside in reserves, the investors aren't getting that distribution, but they're getting taxed on it. As you know, LLCs get taxed on amounts of profits earned, not amounts distributed. So if you make $100, but you have to hold it in reserves, I got to pay taxes on $100 if that's my share of it. So that's another issue which I'm sure has been coming up.
And just to give you an idea of how unprecedented this is, we've set aside more money because the cost of the cap is coming down. We're talking about we'll probably buy the next year's cap at some point in the next few weeks. So we've been setting aside reserves for a year now, and we're actually to the point where we're ready to buy the next cap for the next year. And because costs of these insurance policies have come down a lot since we started putting money in reserves, we have more money in reserves than we're actually going to need to buy the new cap, which is a great thing. But we've gone to the bank and we've basically said, okay, since we've set aside X dollars, but the cap's only going to cost us a lot less than X, I assume we're going to get back the difference that's sitting in escrow. And basically what we've been told, and Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, basically what we've been told is, we don't know. We've never been in the situation.
No, they basically said no. They're like, we'll put it towards the next cap. But like they've never gone through this, so it's kind of a discussion happening on how to handle this, and we're saying, okay, if we buy it early, so that we don't have as many, we don't overpay as much, like what happens with that. And here's the other thing too, is if we buy ours early, since we have a 1% strike on ours and we are so far into the money where the insurance policy is having to pay so much every month, we can resell that unused term of our insurance policy for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So then the next question we're having with the bank is, well, can we keep that? If we buy the next policy, like preemptively before we actually have to buy it, and we sell our old one, can we keep that money, or does it have to go back to the bank? And then, of course, their first initial, oh, no, you can't just keep that. And then we're like, oh, well, show us where it says that we can't. And so now it's a whole discussion on that too. So it's a whole interesting conundrum that everyone's dealing with.
Yeah. So long story short, everybody's talking about the fact that there's refinancing at lower values that are getting operators in trouble. There's higher interest rates that are leading to higher monthly mortgage payments that are getting operators in trouble. But this is kind of the third big thing, and to some degree, I'm hearing more about this than I am about the other two of things getting operators in trouble. And I've talked to a lot of operators who, because of these insurance policies, because of these exorbitant reserve amounts that they're being required to put into escrow a year before their policy expires, I'm hearing a lot of operators who are saying that they're reducing distributions or pausing distributions, or even potentially, like you said, Mauricio, doing a capital call. So this could end up
or refi.
Yeah. So this could be like as big of an issue that multifamily is facing as anything else.
Well, because AJ's sitting over here and all of his debt, I think for the most part, AJ, you have fixed rate. So that's why you're seeing all these people who are floating debt. They're having to do, no one ever heard of a cash in refi, but they're having to do this just to get into that fixed debt because you don't have that problem. Yes, you might not be able to exit, but when times get tough, you just kind of just sit there and ride the wave.
Yeah, we've there's the debt problems that we have on origination, things that we've come in. We verified basically our whole portfolio 2 years ago and put it out for a really long time, till 29. And on our new debt and the problems we've been having, guys, it's been a nightmare on some of our construction loans. what we're seeing on the reserves that are wanted are even on our perms. It's crazy. They're being so look they want 60% down, and then they want these huge reserves. And what it's doing is it's making it impossible for these things to even work. So while while we don't have any problems on the debt side with a lot of our existing ones, meaning just simply meaning it's not coming due and we've been locked in, we're having a complete disaster on the construction loans to try to get anything that's viable and workable. And the banks are so erratic. We'll be working with them, and then we're literally 2 weeks into close, and they're like, hey, C-Suite just called up and said, we no longer do syndications. I kid you not, that happened. We were going to close. C-Suite said we don't do syndications. It was like, we were getting ready to get the papers and everything done. We've been working for months on it. So the banks got their hair on fire. We don't know what they're doing. We literally had our meeting today, and we're like, yeah, we're not using the banks anymore. We're going to go to private construction lenders that focus on our asset type and everything. And we have to pay maybe a 2-point spread, but who cares? It's like, it's irrelevant in comparison to what we're trying to go through with them. So the banks are trying to figure this out. They're all in an absolute mess. And it's making it hard for things to move and transact, and people that are holding, the banks are doing things that I guess think none of us thought that they would or could, and it's surprising everyone, frankly.
And it's always fun. It's always fun to talk to AJ and see AJ right after one of the banks pulls out. It's a lot of fun to see him literally squirmish and be like really in a really good mood.
We had a fun one the other day where the bank all of a sudden put a new policy. We talk about these insurance payments. So Jay was explaining that these rate caps are insurance payments. So what happens is you pay your mortgage, you pay the full amount, but then you get a check from the insurance company to cover the difference. Well, our bank all of a sudden has a new policy where they don't issue your insurance payment to you until they've made sure you've made your monthly payment that month. And we were like, okay, well, we're already 2 months in arrears. Like that insurance, when that check comes in, it was for 2 months ago. So they're withholding checks from 2 months ago on insurance payments from our mortgage payments 2 months ago, because so they must be having people not make like cash in those checks and not making mortgage payments and just put it in their pocket and then giving back the keys, or they're worried about it because we're like, this doesn't make any sense that you're withholding insurance payments from 2 months ago until we make this month's mortgage payment.
Check the policy. I mean, this is always where it may make sense to go higher. There are some attorneys that specialize in insurance, and it may be worth spending $1,500, have somebody take a look at that policy and see if that's something that they're even allowed.
Yeah.
Last people we want to piss off are our lenders.
Yeah, keep them as friends right now, or they pull out on your loans.
So delinquencies, though, if you look today, as we're looking at delinquencies right now, retail, we're up to 5% in the month of I guess I'm assuming this is month of May. Hotels are less at 4%, which is interesting. We've got multifamily, which is under 1%. Industrial, this is for the month. 1%. Mixed use is up, others up. But the interesting thing, though, is from peak. So July delinquency trends were up from the peak at 10.3, over 10%. So the change in delinquencies from like April to May is really big. And office, it's huge. So office change went from just in December at below 2% to 4%. That means
what was the pre-COVID number? Do we know?
Pre-COVID number, it was less than 1.
Okay, so it is. It's not. So that percentage.
Here's a question though:
misleading.
If you don't pay your reserves, is that considered delinquent on your mortgage? So like if I just kept paying my mortgage payment, but then didn't pay this reserve that the bank requires every month, I wonder if that would trigger like a lockbox for sure, but would be considered a delinquent mortgage or not.
I bet you they'll consider it a default because it's the payment as a whole.
But that's fair enough. All right, I think we've touched on that enough. Don't piss off your lender is the is the moral of the story. Can we move on to top 10? You guys ready for this one?
Let's do it.
So we're bringing it back to currencies, and so we're going. What are the top 10 most traded currencies in the world? And I'll let you skip number one because obviously we had a whole discussion. It is the U.S. dollar with like 90%.
I'm going to go with the euro.
Euro number 2.
Number 2.
Yep.
Consensus. Euro is number 2. Number 3.
The yen.
The pound.
Yeah. I
Mauricio, you're right there. Japanese yen.
Booyah! Booyah!
Number 4 is the pound. And then number 5, though, we start getting a little, I don't know if you guys are going to get 5, 6, 7.
5 GBP.
They'll probably
No, that was number 4. GBP was number 4.
I'm throwing in the ruble in there somewhere.
Yeah, so 1 through 4 is US, euro, yen, pound sterling. And then so we got number 5, number 6.
Ruble?
All right.
Peso.
You guys are all over the place. We got the Australian dollar, number 5.
Ah.
Number 6 is the Canadian dollar. Number 7 is the Swiss
Canada
franc.
made the list.
And it's not until number 8 that we get down to the Chinese renminbi.
Renminbi, yep.
Which it wasn't until I did this research that I realized that it's not called the Chinese yuan. Yuan is just the currency value. It's not the name of their currency. So, and then we get down to Hong Kong and New Zealand. So that's what rounds it out.
Where's the ruble on this?
Ruble didn't make the top 10, so I don't know. But they must be relatively strong because we tried to ruin their currency there and it got stronger. That was an interesting sanction.
Oil for rubles now, so we've solved the de-dollarization problem.
You know what I thought? You know what I thought the Russians should have done is they should have loaded up on gold and then only accepted gold for their oil. So then all of a sudden everyone would have to go out and buy gold in order to buy the Russian oil, and then their gold, the value of their gold would just skyrocket. But
the U.S. has been buying gold reserves like mad. They have been the highest purchaser of gold reserves for a while now, and it's astronomical how much.
Let's not get on the gold bug train. They're the ones who started the de-dollarization.
All the gold that they leased out, and now they're just trying to recoup it. Is that what's going on?
Well, think of it this way. If another reserve currency comes along and it's backed by gold, they're going to have to peg the value of gold so much higher.
That's why if you listen to these gold bugs, 15,000, that's the number for gold.
Dude,
all of these
let's talk about gold in our next episode.
All of these de-dollarization, anyone who talks about de-dollarization, they are either a gold bug or they're a crypto bug. It's one of the two. Finally, all right, drinking game at the end. I'm taking from the current news that Elon Musk was going to fight Mark Zuckerberg in an actual cage match. And for about 2 days there, we actually thought it was going to happen. Dana White went on record saying he talked to both of them. They're both into it. And then apparently Elon Musk's mom was the one who nixed it. But it got me thinking to the point where if you could make any 2 people alive right now fight in a no rules cage match, what 2 people would you pick? And I'm going to come right out and say it. No one say Trump and Biden. No one, like that's the default. Everyone would say that. You got to come up with something more creative than Trump and Biden.
Mauricio, you go first.
Well, I was going to say Trump and Biden. I didn't get the memo.
You did get the memo. I literally texted you guys before. Don't say Trump and Biden.
I read your text. I had ChatGPT. I actually had ChatGPT respond to your text. So I don't know if you saw it or not.
You must have Google Messages, Google Bard. No one wants to throw it out there.
I'm gonna go with Putin and Powell.
I thought you were gonna go Russia versus North Korea. That would have been a good one.
Can I just stick with Elon and Zuck? I think that would be, I mean, I would love to, I was so excited. Like literally I was in Vegas when they announced that and they were talking about doing it in the Octagon in Vegas. And all my friends were like, we're just going to.
They probably put a sports book up for it already. They'd betting on it. That's a good question. Who would you have picked?
Oh, definitely Zuck.
Zuck.
But have you seen the size difference though?
Yeah,
it's
size
about 80 pounds.
huge. But Zuck has been training. If Elon today, I bet Zuck. If Elon trained for a year, that'd be different.
All right, but most of these fights have 6 months to a year of training before the actual fight.
I got a better one. What about J. Scott, AJ Osborne?
My legs don't work.
That would be great.
Yeah, but you got the years on them.
We would just hug.
In Coeur d'Alene, actually, not in Vegas, but in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, we should do that one.
Jay Scott would just walk briskly away, and I couldn't keep up.
Can we do the oversized gloves, like the big fake boxing gloves?
It depends if they get to do a John Wick style thing where they get to pick a weapon, because AJ's got quite a few weapons. If you get one of AJ's go-to weapons there, I think he's got it all over.
Yeah, I couldn't win that.
So fight, I'm going to go with DeSantis and Slenderman. What's his name? From California.
Oh, Buttigieg you're talking about? Or no, not Buttigieg.
The governor, Slenderman.
Newsom.
Newton. Newsom, yeah, that
Newsom.
guy. Yeah, I'm going with
the
those
wine
two.
snob? The wine guy?
We always got to bring it. We always got to bring it back to political.
Gavin Newsom and Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas. He's pretty old, isn't he?
He is pretty old.
Yeah.
That might be considered a hate crime too. So, all right.
Gavin Newsom doesn't care about that.
Fair enough. So, Mauricio, you got anything going on you want to plug?
I just did my first ever live stream on my YouTube channel, so go support. It was awesome.
And tell him how good his camera perspective is.
Oh, yeah, my new camera is going to rock.
Jay, you got anything actual tangible?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing a with your wife. We're going to be doing a.
Whoa! Hey!
Let me finish.
Sorry.
We are going to be doing an educational summit and property tour of our properties in Houston, Texas. So for anybody that wants to learn multifamily, and I believe Mr. Mauricio Raoul is going to be there to help educate us, and he'll be one of our guest speakers. So for anybody that's interested in checking out our Houston Summit and property tour, go to jscott.com.
And Mauricio spent a lot of money on that live stream camera, so he's got to make dual purpose use of it and take photos with it too. AJ, you got something to plug other than your new podcast this time?
Oh yeah, talk about the new podcast.
Yeah, it's out. You liked it, Mauricio?
I have not listened to it. It just came out.
I haven't even had a chance Jay Scott's going to be on it, so I've secured that.
Saving capitalism.
I've applied.
Saving capitalism.
Right. Saving capitalism. Jay Scott's going to be on it here soon, everybody. So
I checked my mail. I have not gotten an invite yet. But
so since it's got a new name, AJ, can I come back because I was on the old one?
Heck yeah.
If it's a new name, that's a new podcast, so I can
yeah,
be.
It counts. It counts.
Count it.
I'll
Perfect.
come on and talk about the De-Dollarization myth.
That's right. Now we could have a lot of fun with that, man.
Fair enough. As always.
One more thing. Anybody that's listening, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, leave us a review. If you're listening on whatever podcast platform, we're trying to get the word of this podcast out there. So get the word out. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Leave us a comment. Whatever you need to do, we appreciate it.
Jay, we're like an hour and 50 minutes in. Only your mom and my mom are watching at this point. You got to do that earlier in the show.
Hey, my mom watches too.
She will hit the subscribe button if I tell her to.
Hi, Mom. Well, no. But seriously, we do this shit for free, so that's the only way. Please give back and support us. And once again, as always, follow my wife, Bad Ash Investor, on all your socials. She's smarter than Jay and much better looking. So once again, my drink. Well, I gotta finish it. Woo! My drink is gone. It's time to hit the head. So I will see you next Thursday.